Hey everybody, it's Kiara Ashanti here with the Business Intercept. Hope you are doing well. It is a Saturday afternoon here down in sunny Florida, and I am doing a bunch of video content for you today because it is hot. I mean, hot, on fire outside right now, and so that means there's really nothing important that needs to be done outside. You need to be in the air conditioning. But be that as it may, again, this is the Business Intercept, where I try to go over business news or business current events that you may not have seen in the mainstream press, Wall Street, CNN, Fox News, what have you. Try to find interesting items. But of course, very often, I want to go over stories that you have heard and kind of give you a little further context as to what the business implications for whatever that news event might be is going to be for the country, possibly for yourself. So we're going to talk about something that I know you have heard about. Obviously, you've seen the thumbnail on YouTube, so you have an idea what we're going to be talking about, which, of course, is the eviction moratorium as put out by the CDC. We're going to go into depth about what that is, in case you might not know all the specifics. I'm going to go over a lot about what's the legality or illegality of the CDC moratorium. But in addition, I have a special guest today, Vena Jones-Cox. She is a real estate investor and an educator. And I interviewed her today, just spoke to her for about 20, 30 minutes to kind of get an idea about how this is affecting the people that we're talking about. I mean, it's one thing to think about the people who may be, quote unquote, kicked out of their apartments or their homes that they're renting. But what about the landlords who are ultimately the ones that are being highly affected by this particular situation? I've known Vena for quite some time. We talked now and then, had a chance to speak with her in quite a while. But I knew she would be a good source to kind of give you, my viewers, both present and future, a good idea about the problematic nature of what the government is trying to do right here. So we're going to talk about that in just a few minutes and kind of give you a heads up. There were some technical difficulties, so to speak, with regard to video, so I had to speak with her via the phone, so I recorded it via audio, and of course, again, with video issues, the video that you will see of me listening to her answers and asking questions to her didn't start until a little bit later in our conversation. So at first, you're going to kind of see just a static picture of myself, and then that will transition into the video of our conversation. And of course, on her side of it, I will have a photo of her, and you'll be able to hear the audio. It's really interesting. If you are a renter that is in the position where you have to rely on the moratorium, or if you are kind of a landlord and you're wondering what's your recourse, you haven't had a chance to really speak with the lawyer yet. And of course, some of this is going to kind of depend on what state you are in, obviously. This will be an interesting conversation. And of course, if you're an investor, and when I say investor, if you are somebody who has mutual funds in your 401k or in your IRA, if you got mutual funds in general, in a regular account that invest in the real estate market, particularly apartment buildings, housing, things like this, this is going to have an effect. Near the end of our conversation, Vena kind of gets into what's coming, what's headed our way. So you'll definitely want to stay tuned to hear exactly what that means, because it's going to have an effect on potentially any investments that you have, if you have, again, mutual funds or REITs or anything like that in your portfolio. If you own a home, if you're going to be looking for a home in the next 2 to 3 years, it's also going to have an effect. I mean, there's a cascading effect often that happens within the general marketplace and in everybody's lives when government decides to do something that is not all the way thought through. So before we get into our conversation with Vena, what I'm going to do is kind of set the stage for you real quick by just reviewing a couple of different things, okay? What you want to think about is this. Obviously, this all started because of COVID-19, right? I mean, we know the deal. And the government decided to shut the economy down. Stores were closing, businesses were closing because we were all supposed to stay at home to stop the spread. That was supposed to take 3 months. Now we're a year and a half, almost 2 years into this thing, and we still got a lot of the same problems. It's obviously a lot better than when everything was shut down, okay? But we still got issues. So at the beginning of this, one of the very, important and understandable concerns was, look, if you are shutting the economy down, then you're going to have two things that are going to happen. A, people who can't work don't have a paycheck, which means they can't pay their bills. They can't pay their rent, mortgage, car payment, health insurance, food, daycare, everything like that. Essentially, everything that we send out of our bank accounts every month, we can't do because we don't have a paycheck coming in. Of course, also that means that the people who hire people, small businesses, middle-sized businesses, which are the lifeblood of the country, they don't have any income coming in. And so we were going to see, it was easy to anticipate, we were going to see a lot of companies go out of business because they don't have any income coming in. I mean, if you're a restaurant, and this is, the sector that was hit, I would say, probably the hardest, you don't have any customers coming in, so you don't essentially have a business any longer. And even as time went on and we had the ability to either get money from the government through the Paycheck Protection Program and or as states began to say, okay, enough with the restrictions, we're beginning to open up the economy, we're getting back to normal no matter what, we're just going to have to mitigate, the circumstances with regard to COVID. For a lot of places, that was just too late. I mean, a lot of restaurants went out of business, a lot of retail places went out of business, okay? So, the government put in a lot of different things to try and help mitigate this situation, because obviously they're the ones that caused it, all right, to a certain degree. Part of that was the Paycheck Protection Program, which was a program in which businesses could get forgivable loans from the government that they then turn around and use as funds to pay paycheck to people who are in fact weren't working. They also put in enhanced unemployment benefits, extended unemployment benefits, to the point that people were now at home not working and making more money from all of these benefits and the checks that the government was sending out than if they were working. Because you understand, a lot of the more professional class type employees, lawyers, salespeople, marketers, things like that, a lot of them could shift in certain industries to working from home and still have a paycheck. I know myself, for instance, I was working with a particular company, and I went from working in the office to working out of my office here at home. And so, and my company was considered an essential business, so I was lucky. A lot of other people weren't as lucky, unfortunately. Okay. But as time went on, it became obvious that part of it, there were going to be unintended consequences. And one of the unintended consequences, of course, was, in fact, let me back up. Before I even get to the first unintended consequence, just take a step back. So we got Paycheck Protection Program, we got stimulus checks coming out, we got enhanced benefits. But we also decided to put in an eviction moratorium, which basically meant that, look, if you're a landlord, you can't evict somebody for not paying the rent. And a lot of people kind of felt like that was a good thing to do because, hey, these people are not paying their rent because they don't want to pay for it. They don't have a paycheck. They can't, through no fault, once again, of their own. Okay? So we had all of these different programs. So what happened? Well, as is usually the case with the government, unintended consequences. Completely. So let's kind of go over a couple things here. This was in Reuters back in 2020, the end of 2020. All right, so it's about 8 months ago. But we're going to get to some other stuff in a second. As the pandemic lifeline expires, Americans in housing free fall. Okay, let's kind of go with this. It says Clarence Hammer didn't expect to hang on to his house much longer. His downstairs tenant owes him nearly $50,000 in back rent on the 4-bedroom duplex he owns in Bronzeville, Brooklyn. Without those rental payments, Hammer has been unable to pay the thousands he owes in heat, hot water, and property taxes. It's interesting, isn't it, that the government goes through all kinds of machinations to make sure that people don't have to owe money to creditors, whether they're landlords, mortgage owners, whatever the case may be. But they don't put any moratorium on those taxes that you have to pay. Interesting how that works, isn't it? That's just an aside, something for you to kind of ruminate on. It's interesting how that always happens. They'll demonize landlords, they'll demonize corporate America, they'll demonize all these people who are expecting money that's owed to come in. And when it's tax time, what do? They send you that bill. That's what they do. Okay. So without that, basically, he owes thousands in heat, water, again, property taxes. In September, after exhausting his life savings, he stopped paying his own mortgage. I don't have any corporate backing or any other type of insurance, said Hammer, a 46-year-old landlord who works for the city of New York. All I have is my home, and it seems apparent that I'm going to lose it. America's mom and pop landlords, along with their tenants, have been dangling by a thread for 9 months. Now, with Congress still deadlocked over the contours of a second pandemic stimulus package, they are entering a new housing abyss and perilous period of pandemic limbo as the last of the safety nets are set to expire. And that's true, because this was December. Now we're in the new year. What's happened in subsequent time is a couple of different things. They put in this moratorium that says you couldn't allow people to be evicted. And then they did some additional things with that were problematic legally. Okay? And then it was set to expire this year, just about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And the question was going to be, what were they going to do? Because the economy is still not at full strength. There are a lot of states like Florida and Texas bound and determined to return back to normal as much as possible. And other states, not New York, New Jersey, California, Michigan, and others, most Democratic states that are kind of like, no, we're going to keep things a little bit less open. We're going to have a lot of restrictions, and things of that nature. Of course, we have now gotten to the point now where the economy has 10 million people unemployed and 9 million open positions. Anybody who wants a job can get a job. Like, I'm literally seeing commercials on television for local businesses asking for people to come and apply for a position. I've never seen that before, ever. Not for local business. Like, I'll once in a while have seen, like, Allstate or some large corporation where they might, mention something about looking for people or what have you, or they're touting that they're one of the top employers, the best employers in the country. But never local businesses. I've never seen that. Not as part of a commercial. I mean, think about it. Commercials cost money. a lot of money. So the point is, there are jobs available now. And people go out and get them. But people aren't. And the reason they aren't is, as we'll get into Vena, is they have money coming in a lot of places. And the money they have is more money than they would be making if they were working. Unintended consequences of that is this. You got people with tenants who aren't paying their rent, even though they have the money. Let me give you another example here. This was on Fox News a little while ago. Let me make it a little bit bigger here. And basically, a landlord is out $24,000 in rent due to eviction moratorium. Says tenants are buying boats. In North Carolina, the landlord says he's out $24,000 in unpaid rent from tenants, while one renter bought 3 boats over the course of the eviction moratorium, just as the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention announced a new ban that will last until October 3rd. Buddy Shoup, who owns 35 properties across the state, said that he has been forced to maintain the properties and hemorrhage costs while the federal government slowly dribbles out rental assistance, of which only 7% has been doled out to renters in need. The money was used, they went and bought brand new boats, but I mean, in a time of crisis like we've been through, you're evidently getting money from somewhere, but it's not getting to me. And that's what we have going on here. It's one thing to expect people who don't have any income coming in. Are you going to help them? What are they going to do? You don't want them out in the street. That's the problem. However, just because that's the problem does not mean that people in general are going to do the right thing when they have money coming in, or that the government has a right to just do things that are necessarily or possibly illegal. And this is what we're going to get into. The CDC is a governmental agency. They do not have the authority to implement law. They do not have the authority to create law. That is the purview of the Congress and the Senate. The Congress and the Senate create a law, the president signs it into law, and then the agencies implement that law. It does not work in reverse. Except with this particular situation, this is what we've seen happen. Furthermore, when the Congress did institute the moratorium on a federal level, which is one thing that they're obviously able to do within their power, there were a couple things they then started to do that were outside of the power. And so we're kind of going to go over that as well. So let me kind of bring this up. Okay, so the CDC eviction moratorium is unconstitutional. Okay, so let me kind of go over this. It's a little bit long. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I want to give you, again, a baseline to understand the conversation that me and you are about to have. During the pandemic, many states halted residential evictions. Texas, however, did not. The Lone Star State allowed landlords to use the legal eviction process to remove non-paying tenants until the federal government intervened. The Trump administration and now the Biden administration criminalized evictions. Now, what I want you to be clear on this something here, because this is not a right or left issue necessarily. Remember what it just said. Trump and the Biden administration criminalized evictions. So it wasn't just a left-wing crazy thing from Biden and Kamala. The MAGA guy did this too, his administration. And as you're about to see in a moment, he didn't have the authority to do that. Okay? Yes, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention made it a federal offense for a landlord to use the legal eviction process in state court. That unprecedented executive action was premised on an infernal house of cards. If people are evicted, they will live in closer quarters, potentially spreading COVID-19. To avoid that speculative problem, the government banned landlords nationwide from using legal processes to remove tenants. The government literally made it a crime to file a petition in state court. Lord Turkle, a landlord in East Texas, challenged the CDC's edict, and a federal judge declared that this action went beyond the scope of Congress's enumerated powers. Cato Institute, which is the ones who wrote this, also agreed. They filed an advocacy brief supporting Turkle before the U.S. Court of Appeals in the Fifth Circuit, joined by Professor Randy Barnett and the Reese Foundation, Individual Rights Foundation, and Independence Institute. This case involves constitutional structures of vital importance to individual liberty. Federalism, the separation of powers, the federal government simply lacks the power to regulate the process of eviction in state courts. Under modern Supreme Court jurisprudence, Congress can rely on the implied power to regulate interstate economic activity that in the aggregate has a substantial effect on interstate commerce. That so-called substantial effects test, however, does not apply to non-economic activity. The court has upheld Commerce Clause regulation of interstate activity only where that activity is economic in nature. The legal process of eviction is not economic in nature. What that all means is pretty simple. Congress cannot interfere with legal proceedings within a state. They can't do it. I'll give you another example just to make this really clear. We know that the President of the United States can at any point decide to pardon anybody he wants to for anything. We've seen presidents do it for people who essentially gave lots of money to their library or their campaign. We've seen them do it for reasons of PR, sympathy, yada, yada, yada. What most people don't understand is a president can do that for federal laws and people in jail only. The president cannot pardon somebody who's in jail over a state law issue. If I break a Florida state law and go to jail in a Florida state jail, the president can't pardon me for that. He may want to, but he can't. Now the governor can, because he's the one in charge of the state. Same thing here. Congress can make laws, but if a state is going through legal proceedings based on its state laws, they cannot interfere. And the reason they can't interfere is because legal proceedings are not an economic situation. They just can't. Further, when the CDC decided that they were going to extend the moratorium, not Congress, just the CDC, and say they're going to fine people $100,000 per day if they try and evict somebody, the CDC doesn't have the authority to do that. It's unconstitutional. I mean, it's not even unconstitutional. It's flat out illegal. The President Biden, knows this. He admitted as such. But his attitude was, by the time these things get to a point where the Supreme Court would actually rule on the merits of the case fully, this will all be over. So even though he knows it's against the law, even though he knows it's unconstitutional, even though he knows it's against the oath of office that he took 8 months ago, he is going to ignore it and say, it'll be over by the time it gets to anything anyway. That is very problematic for a whole lot of other reasons, but specifically for this, that's a problem. So that's the general framework. What I'm going to do now is move into the interview portion with Vena, and then I'm going to have some final thoughts on the very end of me and her discussion. Hello, Vena.
Yes.
Good morning. It's Kiara. How are you?
Hi, Kiara. Long time no talk.
I know. Did I catch you? Is this still a good time?
There's never a good time, but there's also never a bad time, so.
Okay. Well, thanks for taking a little time. I just wanted to, like I said, I've got this channel, and I thought you would be a great person to speak to about a segment on this moratorium, so to speak. Okay. So I know your background real quick. If you could just give me a quick elevator speech so the people who I'm doing this for will know your background. That'd be the best way to start off.
Okay. I've been investing in real estate full-time since 1989. I do a combination of strategies, one of which is owning rentals. I'm a licensed broker in Ohio. I'm past president of the National Real Estate Investors Association. And I head up a big national convention every year called the National Real Estate Strategy Summit in Ohio.
Okay, perfect. So when the moratorium first started, they had this idea because everything was going with COVID. What was your initial first reaction, both yourself and the people that you know who are also landlords?
Well, at the very beginning, we were all scrambling to get into, this was before the moratorium was even announced. So, beginning of COVID, no one knows what's going to happen. Everybody I knew was contacting their tenants, making sure they were okay, trying to get some feel for is your job in danger? Do you have the kind of job that they're starting to shut down? Do you need anything? Do you need a payment plan? We can arrange for you to not pay rent this month. We'll just catch it up when they start issuing unemployment checks. I mean, it was a real kind of coming together in the rental housing community, trying to make sure everybody was going to be okay.
Okay. So basically, I mean, because the character, and I know you've dealt with this for years, is always that landlords are some unfeeling, unemotional, don't care about the tenants, they just want the money. And that's not actually the way it is in real life, of course, right?
I can't speak for the big corporate landlords because I've never rented from one and I don't know many of them. But I can tell you that the housing providers who own 70% of the rental properties in the United States are individual owners. They're small owners who might own anywhere from one to maybe if they're super, they've been in it for a really long time, they might own 25 or 30 rental properties. It's, for them, it's more of a, I'm going to keep working my job because I can't live off of 25 rental properties that have mortgages on them. But when I'm ready to retire, I'll have these things that I can, have a comfortable retirement on.
Right. Okay.
And folks like that are, the tenants are customers, right? And they have a mostly a service mentality about that of, I want good customers, but I also am going to take care of things, and I actually care if their grandma's sick, and it's very, very different than the caricature.
Okay. Right.
A lot of my colleagues will say things like, well, I get to be friends with my tenants, and they stay 8-10 years, and I'm really sorry to see them leave. Now, of course, in every industry, you've got the outliers who are exactly what the character is. I'm sure those people exist.
Right.
Just like there are doctors who perform bad medicine and lawyers who go to jail for stealing their clients' money. There's the outliers, and those are the people who make it into the papers, and then there's the other 99.9% of people that don't make it into the papers because they're doing exactly what they're supposed to do.
Right.
The first thing that hit us was not the federal moratorium, it was the state moratoriums, and every state put these moratoriums in place. And that felt a little extreme to those of us who were already trying to work with tenants. I had a couple of residents that they were so scared of, I can't go to work and I don't have any money in the bank and I've got kids and the kids can't go to school anymore. And I'm actually a little worried about feeding them. And we actually went and dropped off $100 Kroger gift cards to them and said, tell us if you need more, right? And it was a big, and this wasn't just me. I'm not saying like, oh gosh, I'm awesome. I'm saying I talked to a lot of people that did similar things. But within the month, the first round of checks was going out, the unemployment thing was out there, and people could actually get, in some cases, more money than they had been working. So when the state eviction moratoriums came around, we all just sort of rolled our eyes for doing this when everybody's getting money, and this will all be over in 3 months anyway. Remember when we thought that?
Yeah, exactly.
And so then as the state moratoriums were expiring in August of last year, then the CDC announced its moratorium, and that set the rental housing community on fire. Mm-hmm. I mean, just the anger about how does this organization have the right to tell everyone in every state, no matter what that state's COVID or money situation is, that they can't collect rent on this flimsy thing, right? The bone that the CDC threw was, oh, but the tenant has to sign this piece of paper that says that they're trying their hardest to pay as much rent as they can, and they've been COVID affected, and they'll be homeless if they don't, if they get evicted. And then it does say at the bottom, under penalty of perjury, and the tenant signs it, but that's literally all they have to do. No court's actually going to
look at it.
Take it down for perjury if they check those boxes and it turns out not to be true. Mm-hmm. That set off something really interesting, which is that I started hearing from people all over the country, if my rights, it's not my rights, right? What we have here is a contract.
Right.
And the contract says you will pay and I will provide housing. And the CDC just said, well, you have to do your half, but they don't have to do their half.
Right.
I mean, it's like dropping a hand grenade in the middle of contract law. Mm-hmm. And I started hearing from a lot of people saying, well, I have put my rental houses up on the market.
Yeah, exactly.
Super hot. People will pay me stupid money for them. And those people who are paying stupid money for them are not other rental housing providers.
Right. Well, I want to go back real quick because you said something that I think a lot of people forget, and I want to re-emphasize it. At the start of this, the states put in their own moratoriums, but soon after, all of this money from the Fed and from a lot of state and local governments start to come in to try and make up for the fact that people couldn't go to work because of COVID. And so many people were getting actual money in their accounts that was higher than when they were actually working. So they had the money, correct? For the most part.
Correct. They had the money. And we had one resident during that time who continued to not pay the rent despite the fact that she was getting the money. She, however, was behind in January. I mean, she was headed toward eviction before any of this started. This was just one of those, 5% of your renters will, for whatever reason, decide that they don't want to be there anymore and they'll stop paying and they'll go through the eviction process.
Right.
And we had one who, despite getting that money did not get herself caught up. She just wrote out the state moratorium, because the state moratoriums basically meant the eviction court was closed. Mm-hmm. You couldn't get in to do a hearing. The courthouse was closed. So that was not good, but the money going right into the accounts and coming on also in addition to that in the form of unemployment allowed residents who did want to stay to stay. Mm-hmm. They were making the same or more money than they did before.
Right. Right.
The federal moratorium was what really got people to thinking, maybe I don't want to be in this business anymore, because if the federal government can just abrogate my rights with a stroke of a pen, not even any discussion, what can they do next? And we have seen hundreds of properties that used to be nice, affordable rentals here in Cincinnati go on the market and either sell to homeowners, so now they're not rentals anymore, or they've sold to rehabbers who then fixed them up, doubled the price, and sold it to homeowners.
Right. Now, how does that work when you've got the person still stuck in the house? Yeah, how does that work? Like, if the renter's not leaving because they think they can't be forced out the house, and then the house gets sold.
They're not typically being sold with the renters in them. Either the renters move out because they need a bigger place, or there were a number of people who, way at the beginning of this, back in March and April, they had vacancies. Mm-hmm. They just locked the doors and said, I'm not going to rent them.
Okay.
Until what happens here.
Right. Okay. So we got the first moratorium. That was sketchy, and then of course the Supreme Court ruled against it because the CDC doesn't really have the authority to make those types of rules. And then it's gotten extended per the CDC. And my big question is, and obviously this is what I'm thinking as someone who doesn't own rental properties, I'm like, okay, why can't they just force the people out? Because they literally don't have any legal right to stay in the house anymore, because the moratorium is done. It's over, no matter what the CDC says.
So that's been interesting if you then watched what happened in states. In Ohio, within a week after the second, now known to be unconstitutional moratorium went into effect, the eviction courts in Columbus said, we believe that we have to follow the federal court's ruling in Northern Ohio that said that the moratorium was unconstitutional and not enforceable. So we are going to continue with evictions. And then Hamilton County, where I live, pretty much said the same thing. Mm-hmm. So there's these little rebellions going on in the courts.
Okay.
It's really interesting because both Hamilton and these are not conservative counties. These are counties that went for Biden and that are blue counties. And the judges there said, we don't think we can follow the CDC moratorium because we think that what the Northern Ohio federal court said is that this is still unconstitutional. Even Biden admitted that it was unconstitutional.
Yeah, that seems to be, not to get too political, but that does seem to be a habit. His former boss said the same thing about, the Dreamers, but did it anyway, and now he said it, and he's basically like, oh, I think it is, but it's gonna take too long for the courts to get around to it anyway, so we're just gonna do it, and by the time it gets to the court, all of this will be, gone. Although we've heard that all this will be gone soon before.
I pledge to uphold the laws of the country to the best of my ability when it feels good to me.
Right.
I didn't get part of the oath.
Yeah, I didn't either. So what about any counties or states that, for what other reason, have said they're going to ignore what the Supreme Court has said for the moment. Have you seen or heard from people who are kind of stuck in those areas?
Yes, there are folks stuck in those areas in the other 49 states, as far as I'm aware. I mean, there may not be any other states other than here in Ohio where this has happened. Mm-hmm. But here's the practicality of that whole moratorium. The excuse for the last 2 extensions has been it will give us time to get this federal aid out. Now, that federal aid's been available since January. Second round has been available since January. It's August. Mm-hmm. Last statistic I read said 7% of it had actually gone out. It has been 8 months. 7% has gone out. Wow. Why is that? Well, the reasons that I am hearing, and I'm just hearing this in state after state after state, Indiana, Arizona, Michigan, every place I talk to someone, is the way that it was distributed, which is we're going to give each state, the federal government's going to give each state their share, and then the states are going to decide the mechanism to put it out. The mechanism has turned out to be a political football, of course.
Right.
Here in Cincinnati, they chose a nonprofit agency that does other things to distribute this money, and they are completely overwhelmed. You cannot call them. You sit on hold for 45 minutes and then get dumped into a voicemail. We went over to physically go to the building the other day because we had one resident who had applied online, and they asked the resident a question that neither they nor we understood, so we were just going to carry it over and ask. Mm-hmm. They are permanently, they have a sign up that says, due to health concerns, this building is not open. Most of my, I'm not going to say most, half of my residents who are in the truly low income category, but don't have Section 8, now those guys aren't in trouble, their checks are still coming in. Mm-hmm. To ask them to apply for aid online is stunningly difficult for them. They don't have the kind of jobs where they work on computers at work. They typically don't have computers at home. They go to the library, get on the computer, go to the form, and then the form is complicated. And ask them all kinds of questions that they don't know how to answer. So it is both that a barrier has been thrown in front of the people who most need the aid. They would be much more comfortable getting on a bus, going to this building, applying in person with help, and spending all day there if they had to. Like they would like that better than having to go on the computer and do this. But that's not an option. Right. And of course, there's a lot of chit chat that maybe the states are intentionally not making it easy to get, because if they don't give it all away, they get to keep it for other purposes. Mm-hmm. And I don't have any opinion on that one way or another. I can just tell you that there are a lot of people who have started down the road of applying for the aid and stopped because they just couldn't handle it. Like they just couldn't figure out how to make it work. So we've now got people who are under eviction because it's not that you can't evict people, it's that you can't complete the eviction if they fill out that form. And they are going to eviction court when they could be not going to eviction court if the government had somehow thought through this process of how are we going to get aid into people's hands. And it doesn't matter how long they extend this moratorium, under the current circumstances, these people will still never get the money because they just can't manage to do it. And we've even tried helping them because of the way that it's online. It's not like we can fill it out for them and have them sign it like if it were a paper form. Mm-hmm. So it's all a huge kludge. And
what you're describing, to be honest with you, Vena, just seems to me like your basic governmental bureaucracy cluster. Because we've heard so many times this year and in years past when there's some sort of a federal or national emergency with federal funds that are supposed to be set aside, and then we find out a year later, well, not even half the funds have been used, but they're asking for more money, right, for the same program. And it's like, well, what about all this other cash that we gave you, 10 billion, 20 billion, whatever the case may be, that hasn't been used? And I think it's situations like this where it goes from why they would send it to the states and then have the states send it to some sort of nonprofit. To me, it's just, that's not going to work. I mean, it's just too complicated.
Yeah, and I honestly think that the Community Action Agency here is probably doing the absolute best it can, but it was not ready to distribute millions of dollars in aid. It had no processes, it didn't have the people, and I don't know that they will ever get caught up. So the result of this eviction moratorium is that people are still getting evicted because they are going to court and they are not able to sign that thing that says I'm going to be homeless, I've been COVID affected, and they don't sign it because that's not true. Mm-hmm. Of course, I mean, the whole thing is also a moral hazard, because there are some cities and states where I understand that like 40% of tenants haven't paid rent since September, and it's not the case that 40% of them can't
find rise or don't have money. Correct.
Because if you put a moral hazard in their way that says, look, you don't have to pay this, and then all you have to do is sign this little form, and maybe you're telling a lie, but who's going to do anything about it? And also, listen to the media. Your landlord's evil. He's just in it for the money.
Right.
Why would you not? I mean, you have to be pretty smart and say, I'm going to do what I said I was going to do, even though I can't. I don't have to. Nothing's going to happen to me as a result. And also, I'm being told I should hate these people that are getting the money anyway.
So what is the recourse that you guys have now? Because as I listen to the news, my attitude's always been like, well, I would just move them out. But, that's always a little bit of a problem. Are there, I'm assuming there are lawsuits both individually and maybe in some groups that are happening right now regarding this?
Yes, the morning after the evening that was announced, the Alabama Board of Realtors had a lawsuit had a filing on the federal court's desk about it, and then later that day, the Washington State Apartment Association maybe filed. So they didn't write that up overnight. They were ready for it.
They were right. Okay, yeah. So they were getting inklings from their people in Washington or their governmental affairs people.
I think it was probably a just-in-case thing because the Supreme Court made a non-decision.
Right.
They said we believe that this is unconstitutional,
but it's ending
because it's only 2 more weeks.
Right.
So much for bargain making with the Supreme Court.
Well, yeah, I mean they've done that a lot on a lot of different issues, both economic and social. And it's like I understand the logic to it behind it. Sometimes, like, well, it's not in the court system anymore, or it's not an issue, so why should we take up the case? But of course, that makes the case come back all over again. It takes a much longer time, and it's so annoying.
Yeah. And think about just drawing back from the fact that it happens to affect me and 11 million other housing providers who are individuals who, if our tenants aren't paying, literally, it's either lose the property. I can't pay the taxes, I can't pay the insurance, I can't pay the maintenance, I can't pay the bank, or I go out and get a second job to pay for it.
Right.
And that's where a lot of folks are working. But pull away from that and say, what does this mean? What does the fact that the CDC, of all things, can just say, yeah, it's a health problem, so we are just modifying every contract in the country, thusly mean to every other business in the world? What happens if they say, well, people need to eat and it's a pandemic, so it's no longer legal for grocery stores to require people to pay money for their groceries?
Yeah, people don't look at it that way, but you're right. It's the same concept. And my understanding, of course, is that, if this was to say end for certain, 6 months from now, all of that past rent, it's not as if it's not still due. Like, they still owe all of the rent that's in arrears, right? So I'm not even sure how they're going to have to handle that.
Let's be realistic. If you are the person who owes me $10,000 in back rent, I can probably go after you and your stuff and your bank account and your salary and. My typical resident does something like cuts hair for a living, or runs a daycare out of their home, or packs boxes at Amazon. They don't have any assets I can go after.
Right.
So do they owe it? Yes. Is it collectible? No. That is not this. That does not put them in an equivalent situation with their housing providers, because this is what I keep hearing. What do you people care? You don't have to make your mortgage payments anyway, because there's a foreclosure moratorium too. Well, most of my houses are not financed by banks; they're financed by individual human beings that depend on me for a monthly income, and I can't go and say, Grandma, I'm sorry, I can't make the payments because my tenant isn't making them to me. So that doesn't apply to me, but even if it did, on the few bank loans I have, if I stopped paying them, at the end of when all of this stuff expires, the bank has recourse for the $10,000 I owe them because they have the
property
of
right.
the house.
Right.
I don't have any security with the tenants. There's nothing there to get. It would be ridiculous for me to go to a small claims court and spend $1,200 getting a judgment to go try and collect on somebody who's uncollectible.
So we have another slight real estate bump or bomb coming our way after this is over. I mean, depending on how many, private rentals, because obviously it's like yourself, people who are renting homes or who own small apartment buildings versus the big corporate places that own apartment buildings. But even they may be in a bit of an issue depending on what, income levels that their apartment complexes are at.
Right. Yeah, there's a couple of small time bombs ticking. One is in the apartments, because many of those folks have financing that is, you have to renew it every 5 years, right?
Right.
5-year balloons. And when their 5-year balloon comes up in 2 or 3 years, they're going to have this income hitch that might not qualify them to refinance. So now they've got a huge problem. They've got a ballooned loan on a building that they can keep making the payments if the bank would extend and pretend. But if the bank says, nope, we want our money back, how do they get it back? They have to sell.
Right.
If they all sell at once, of course that drives down prices. We've also got the little time bomb of housing providers who have not been able to make their payments, and they're going to come due here shortly, and they're not going to have money to cover it. A lot of those will probably be taken care of with forbearance agreements. Mm-hmm. I think the bigger time bomb is when people all over the country can finally just move people out. They can just say, whether you paid your rent or not, I want the house empty. They will sell. And we had an affordable housing crisis before this started. We are going to have an affordable housing slaughter when it's over. It will be very, very difficult for anyone to find a truly affordable rental, because even the affordable ones now, the prices will go way up because there will be so many fewer of them.
That's exactly what I was thinking is probably going to be the next huge issue, particularly after everybody started getting all upset with BlackRock a few months ago because they were buying up all these single-family homes, and certainly there's going to be a lot bigger market for them in terms of people trying to sell if they want to continue going that route. Well, Vena, thank you for taking a little time with me to go over some of this basic stuff. I really appreciate it.
You are very welcome.
All right. I will talk to you soon. You have a good rest of your day.
You too.
All right. Bye-bye.
So I hope you enjoyed that interview with Vena. She's very knowledgeable. I think you can tell from her tone, she's not one of these people who is only thinking about the money, as she explained, not only for herself, but for the people that she knows, other landlords across the country. I think she does a good job of speaking for them. They know their tenants a lot of times. These are people that might be living in their properties for years at a time, 5, 6, 7 years. To some degree, their friends, their family. Some people, even though say that, might think of them as family members to a certain degree. But at the end of the day, they do pay rent, and the landlord owes money to somebody else. And they don't have a moratorium for their mortgage. When the bill comes due, the banks do expect that it's be paid, or worse, if it's private seller financing, as being mentioned at near the last part of the conversation we had. It's even worse because that person that you have the private financing through, they're relying on you making payment for their livelihood, their retirement, and what have you, just like the landlord is relying on the tenants. Third unintended consequence is what she mentioned here, and that is this. All across the country, especially in California, especially in New York, especially in a lot of the big cities, but pretty much you can find this to be the case everywhere, there is a housing crisis. And the crisis is there aren't a lot of homes or apartment complexes. There is a lot of demand, very little supply. And what that means is the costs for getting an apartment are higher. Right now in Florida, in the Orlando area, where I'm located, if you want to get a nice 2-bedroom apartment, you are going to be paying a mortgage payment. No, seriously. Like 5, 6 years ago, you could get one, a 2-bedroom, somewhere between $1,000, maybe $1,200. That same apartment today is going to be somewhere from $1,600 all the way up to $2,000 a month. If you go with any of the newer apartment complexes, the ones that look like condos and got really nice furnishings and things like that, you're looking at $2,000 a month minimum. Minimum. That is a mortgage payment. Seriously. And they can get it because there's not as many apartments available. And the apartments that are being built furiously, they're going to have the same, obviously, amount of cost to them. So we've got that coming, and that's going to be a problem because as you get more people who are needing rent and affordable housing, and it's not available, they're kind of stuck where they're at. So this is a cascading effect. You've heard me say that term again. So, let me go through it. A lot of the people, as Vena mentioned, are going to end up selling their homes, either because they don't want to deal with it anymore, or because they have no choice but to do so because they can't refi. Okay? So who's going to buy these homes? Because it's not as if they're going to be sold cheap. I don't know, maybe BlackRock, who started 6, 7 months ago, buying up all sorts of single-family homes so that they can find another innovative way to add additional return to their investors in their investment portfolio. Maybe BlackRock or someone copying BlackRock will come and buy them and pay a premium, so prices go up even higher. People who are stuck in apartments, guess what? As rents in the area go up, you will see your rent go up as well. And if you can't afford it, what are you going to do? Now, some of this was already percolating within the country. So it's not completely the government's fault in terms of what's going on with the moratorium and COVID. But this is going to be an exasperating situation on a problem that was already present. And then what are you going to do? It's not sustainable. It's just not. And this is what happens when government tries to control or introduce certain things into the economy. Look, I'm going to put the Republicans and conservatives aside for a second. And this isn't really a knock on liberals and Democrats in a political sense. This is more of a practical, what's the term I'm going to use? Operational sense. That's the old term that you heard. The path to hell is paved with good intentions. Very often, the kernel of what liberals or Democrats want to do economically are based on good intentions, based on having empathy or caring about others, or based on seeing a problem that they see coming or that they see exist. In this case, people not being able to pay their bills, their rent, their mortgage, whatever the case, because they can't work, and trying to come up with a solution. And like a contractor who sees everything as a nail, right? They usually only have one way of handling crises like that, which is monetary expenditures in terms of savings given to people, or governmental programs in which the government pays for something, or the government comes in and tells a private business, you can't do this because of A, B, C. And then they sell it by demonizing the people. So it's not mom and pop landlords who are about to lose their home because part of their mortgage was paid by the tenant that's living in the basement apartment or the backyard apartment or whatever the case may be. It's the evil corporate minions who don't care about people being in the street. That's how they sell it. But there's, as again, cascading effect. You owe money to your landlord. The landlord owes money to the bank or private investor who loaned them money. Those monies have to change hands. And when you have a situation where people are A, not working, but getting enough money from the government to pay rent and deciding not to, you've got a problem. When you've got a governmental program where you set aside hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars, ostensibly to send to tenants to then give the money to the landlords, or even programs that the landlords themselves can apply, and you've got a nightmare on the bureaucratic side as to how to apply for it, and the money's not being doled out, then essentially all of the arguments, all of the machinations in Congress that you went through in order to get this program through becomes pointless because it's not being implemented correctly. And we see this with government all the time. They have these programs, they set aside billions of dollars, and a year later you find out most of the money hasn't been allocated, hasn't been sent out, it's sitting in some governmental account, I guess. And then these people are back in Congress in front of the cameras talking about how they have to get more money allocated when they haven't even spent the money they put aside yet. As Vena mentioned in our talk, there's a program in place for these tenants, but they can't fill out paperwork because it's only done online. If you don't have a computer or you don't understand the way it shows up on the computer program, what's your recourse? You can't go to the office. It's closed. Now, granted, she's talking about Ohio. Every state's different, but we've heard this across the country over and over again. This money is not allocated, whether it was the Paycheck Protection Program, money set aside for these moratoriums, and then as a practical matter, again, there should not be overlapping solutions. If you have a problem and a state comes up with a solution, the federal government doesn't need to come in and add anything to that. There's no point in doing that. It's been solved. Some states put their own moratoriums in. So, look, this is all a cluster. And how it's going to affect you moving forward is this. As these little bubbles begin to bubble up more and more to the point where they may pop in housing for renters, whether it's on the apartment side, whether it's mutual funds or portfolios that are involved in REITs, on that side of things, REITs meaning real estate investment trusts, that's going to affect, because even though the thought process is, these things are higher in price, so there's going to be more income coming in, that's assuming that people are going to be able to keep paying for it. What we may find is more and more people staying with their parents, which, I mean, a lot of these millennials that are home anyway, but believe me, that could be extended. That will affect the housing market. You can get to a point where you got a glut because people want to get that demand in, or meet that demand rather, and then it peaks out. We need a little bit more balance here. And how that balance is going to happen, well, it's not going to in the short term. The other thing for you to think about is this. If you are a homeowner, what this means for you is that, depending on the area that you're in, the value of your home should go up. You should have more equity in your home. The question is going to be, of course, how can you take advantage of it? Because the only way to truly take advantage of it would be to sell it. But you sell yours, get a good price for it, but then you have to go and buy a new home at a much higher price. So there's really no point. Now, the only thing you might be able to do if you're in the financial situation to do so is maybe refi, take the money out and get rid of other bills, or set up some sort of HELOC type situation against your home, in which you can do the same thing. But that will be a subject for a future episode of the Business Intercept. I want to remind you that if you have any questions or comments, please put them down below. Always remember to subscribe, hit the notification bell, give me a thumbs up. If you got some, again, comments, bad things to say even, put them down below. I have no problem talking to and answering any of the comments below. And of course, if you get notifications set up, you will be obviously notified when the next episode of the Business Intercept is posted on Facebook. On YouTube.